Welcome back to another episode of It's Data Habibi. So I'm Luke Cann, CEO and co-founder of HEMOdata, and we're exploring the world of data across AI, governance, customer behavior, infrastructure, and everything that shapes how modern organizations actually operate. Today's episode is about a problem most teams don't realize they have until personalization breaks. Attribution stops making sense, and trust in the data quietly disappears. We're talking about data identity resolution. Think about it as a foundation that determines how well you actually know your customers. Or do you just have disconnected fragments of sporadic engagements? Today's organizations collect more data than ever from web events, app activity, CRM records, loyalty data, and in-store purchases. And yet most teams still don't have reliable answers to basic questions. Who is this customer, really? So today's episode will explore why so many teams struggle to build a single view of the customer, why personalization often feels incomplete, lacks consistency, or is just ineffective, and why identity resolution is a business problem. So to unpack this on today's episode, we are joined by two guests who sit on very different sides of this challenge. So I'd like to welcome today Pavel, head of product and co-founder at Meiro, building customer data platforms and identity systems at scale, and Vinay, director of sales and marketing from Samsonite Middle East, living with commercial realities of identity, trust, and activation every day. So thank you very much, guys. And over to you to introduce yourselves. So Pavel, let's start with you.
Thanks, Luke, for kind intro. My name is Pavel. I'm a co-founder of a software company. We do one thing that I've been focusing for the last 10 years, which is a customer data platform, and identity resolution is sort of somewhere hidden in there. And we know that we need to shine more light into it because we think it's still widely under-adopted and misunderstood. So that's exciting to be here today.
So firstly, I would like to thank Luke and HEMOdata for inviting me here. Happy to be here and sharing my thoughts on the topic. And I am Vinay. I represent Samsonite, as you already mentioned. I handle sales and marketing for this region. We handle multiple markets here, not just GCC, but also CIS countries, East Africa, and SAARC region other than India. So I can give you my understanding of the business from the consumer brand's perspective, on the consumer's insights and what we do actually in business.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thanks both for joining. So let's jump in then. So we'll start with Identity 101, start at the top and let's go from there. So when organizations say, we know our customers, what do you think they're kind of overestimating? Do they genuinely have the full picture?
Let me answer that from my perspective. Any global brand or even a regional brand, when they're talking about, we know our consumers very well, usually they're overstating it. And I don't think they really understand the consumers very well. And for most large organizations, they face the same kind of challenge. Even if I will talk about my brand, Samsung, we have multiple brands and we operate in multiple geographies across the world. So every market is very different. When we try to paint everything under one brush and say that we understand this is our consumer, this is how we are positioned, and without understanding the cultural nuances and how the consumers are split in different markets, and without understanding the real consumer, by factoring in all these elements, you will never be able to really understand. There are markets where sometimes we struggle. The time that we take to understand the consumer, maybe it's 3 to 5 years. There are markets where we are able to crack much faster because I think it all boils down to the understanding of the consumer.
Yeah, and because that's taking you time to build up that profile of the consumer as well. Right?
Absolutely. Sometimes we really overestimate. We try to, being a global organization, our learnings we try to replicate in other markets. Some of the best learnings or some of the successes we think we can just copy paste or implement in other markets. Then we realize that it doesn't work because without really understanding who the consumer is in those markets, without understanding the culture of the consumer of the markets, without understanding the teams, how the processes are, just copy pasting or implementing things doesn't work really.
Yeah, very good. Thank you for that. And Pavel, what's your take on
Yeah, look, I promised myself not to try to answer every question with "it depends," but it really depends who you ask here. Because I think if you ask a CMO, they might look at it from more of a sense of do we understand our consumer from a research, or are we looking at what do we internally know about our customer? And those are two completely different things, right? Um, I think generally there's a adoption curve to understanding your customers, and I think there's a slightly miscalculated effect that the customer data foundation is going to have in future, especially when you are trying to have more automated interactions with the consumer through different media, different agents, different chatbots. But I think foundationally, I think the baseline is somewhere around we have a database with our customers, we have their transactions, and we can derive some of this data from their transactions. There are going to be occasional pockets where this is going to be completely different, and the adoption is going to be through the roof, especially when it comes to businesses knowing how to monetize their data, which is specifically telco, specifically financial institutions. Because if you look at a correlation of how good bank performs with credit products is a function of their risk management as well as collection. But in risk management, you are fully determined by how qualitatively deep picture of your consumer, applicant, customer, whatever you call them, you have, right? So you have a direct incentive to be really detailed. So there's pockets where this is much more developed, but I think especially when it comes to retail, we really are kind of the baseline. The foundation is like we've got a customer and list of orders. If we're really lucky, we already have maybe customer care tickets and their complaints paired to it. But that's where we start, and I think that needs to improve if you want to be doing better than your competitors.
Yeah, very good. And so moving on with that then, and I think, some of what you just said was around almost customers oversimplifying the problem potentially. Why is the idea of getting to that single view of the customer so difficult when it seems like, it should be a very simple concept?
Yeah, I think we often ask this question to ourselves. If understanding a consumer is so easy, why are we really struggling to understand better? Is one, I think the process and the team that we have, and usually the teams in every market feel that they know the consumer better. One is that overestimation and overconfidence that we know everything. That most organizations go wrong, especially when the team and the members of the team start feeling that we know our consumers very well. And most of the cases, the data is also very outdated. So when the team has been operating in a particular territory on the market for, say, 15 years or 20 years, in most of the cases, their understanding of the consumer or the data set is very outdated. If you see every 10 years, you would see a new workforce that's coming into the market. They have different requirements, they have different aspirations. And if you don't understand that consumer and their aspirations very well, we would often make a lot of errors and judgmental mistakes. That's what we've been doing. And also, one of the challenges that we keep facing is there's a lot of data out there, especially for a retail brand and an online brand like ours. The data is all sitting in silos.
Yeah, and it's a good point, right? You have to be able to keep your data fresh and relevant, because even though you might have some of a profile of a customer going back, as you say, maybe 10 years, 15 years, even longer, it's potentially not relevant to their shopping habits or behaviors or their profile as to who they are today, which is also kind of why it's so important as well to uh, keep your data relevant, even from a governance and privacy point of view, right? In terms of making sure is what I have still relevant to be able to service and understand this customer today.
Yeah, I think a lot of data that comes to us, one is what kind of insights are coming out of it, and there's a lot of data which is coming thrown at us. But then, what kind of insights we are able to take out from that, even from inputs from our teams. There's a lot of noise, but then what's the real insight that's coming up that can be matched with the data? Something that can lead to us to concrete decision making. If it's not, then all that data is useless.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got to be able to put that into practice and have it drive value for your businesses, right? So, yeah, very good. And so, Pavel, do you want to step in on that one?
Yeah. So this is really multifaceted problem the way I see it, and I've been spending time with different organization over the last couple of years on this. I think starting internally from the kind of perspective of a brand of a client, the data silo is obvious, right? So you have data sitting in different systems. So there's technological change and technical change to connect it in the first place. So that's where kind of we are stepping in, and we like to kind of begin this conversation. I think the data silo bit has kind of a political and ownership aspect as well, because you are looking at who owns it. Is it this department, that department? Are they willing to share? I think for me the bigger question is who owns this, because who owns the customer entity? Is it marketing? Is it IT? Is it some sort of merged in between the two? Do they share objectives, responsibilities? So this is really tricky, I think, organizationally. Externally, I think the landscape is always shifting. Which is interesting. So customers are changing habits. They are behaving differently. They have different touch points. So 10 years ago, you were kind of exploring web. Then mobile came into that. Then you look at any stats, and there's an average registration in GCC countries, so phone numbers per consumer is something like 1.5. So basically, almost everyone has two phone numbers and two devices at least. You have digital touch points where even you can talk to your fridge at this point, which can collect some data about you, and you can log into it. So I think the kind of there's an explosion in terms of touch points that customer can use, and of course this is not really stopping. We see that now with the generative LLM interfaces and more intelligent assistants, which at some point are going to be also sharing some data about consumer that you can as a brand access, I'm assuming, because that's where we've kind of always headed. So there's a couple of challenges like that. Ultimately, kind of what we try to solve, and what I see as the kind of the technological problem is, how are you really viewing the identity of a customer, and what is it really? Because is customer phone number, is customer an email address, is that enough? I don't know. I think no, but we'll probably get into that.
Yeah, and we'll come on to that. But actually, just going back to your previous point, about who owns this within the organization. This is a conversation that we have with customers, all the time, because, to really understand, as you say, you've got different touch points within the organization collecting all of this data, and then it's not just about the technology, but ultimately how you bring the business together to be able to get that view in the first place, but then also to leverage that in the different areas across the business as well. And then just you brought me on quite nicely to the next kind of question there, which actually identity resolution in simple terms. So Pavel, I think this is a good one for you to kind of lead on with.
So it's a home ground for sure. So look, identity resolution, just kind of if I was supposed to give a 60 second masterclass of this, what is it and what it isn't. I think there's a historical concept, if you kind of look at technically, of databases, which kind of stems from like core technologies, that you have to have some kind of primary ID and you can attach something to it, right? And I think that technology has been surpassed. Luckily, we really see customer identity as a graph problem where every customer can be described differently, and you also have to kind of go one step further to what is a customer? Because if you kind of really are, if you do semantic analysis, you really mean someone who is bought from you. We argue that there's a lot of data to be collected about your customers in the upper marketing funnel when they are just interacting with you, when they are discovering your brands, whether on your own asset or somewhere else in digital space where you're targeting them perhaps with ads behaviorally. So there's already little snippets of data to be collected, which then kind of form and develop a full picture as that consumer goes through the funnel and buys the suitcase, registers for loyalty, for warranty, downloads the app that comes with that, and they kind of fully develop that picture. But if you look at it, for us, identity resolution is ability to describe customer on uniquely on different touch points, different devices over time, and with that provide a full picture of a behavioral data, not just the transactional. And I think that's a kind of good core start.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good kind of technical articulation of identity management. And then Vinay, maybe you could elaborate from actually what that translates as for you in the marketing function.
I think Pavel articulated it very well. I think that's something that's missing in. I think when I interact with a lot of my other counterparts, I realize that that's a missing piece in a lot of places, and it goes the same for us also. Uh, Sometimes there's lack of clarity on that because, especially, let's imagine a market like UAE, where you have different nationalities, different ethnicities, and people buying for various reasons. And some of the products are bought for gifting, some of the products are bought for something else. There's a lot of people travel international or there's staycation. The products are bought for multiple reasons, not just for one. And for some people buy because there's a cost arbitrage, and in your home country it's expensive, so you buy it here for some whatever reasons. So we sometimes we lack that kind of clarity in terms of who the customer is and who the consumer is. So we often ask this question: you track the behavior of a particular customer is buying for some reason, but who's the real consumer? So maybe their parents are buying for their backpack for their kids.
So understanding who the end user is going to be.
Who the end user is and what is the real behavior there.
Yeah, because it might, as you say, it might not necessarily be the purchaser, right? They're just facilitating.
There's a family who's and male is taking a decision. That's why I said there are a lot of cultural nuances that we need to understand from market to market. There are markets where each individual of the family goes out and buy on their own as per their need. And there are markets where it's a male who takes a decision for the entire family and they're buying all the products for them. And then often we consider that particular consumer, we consider that customer as a consumer. And then we'll be targeting a lot of things to the particular customer, but then may not be relevant.
Yeah, and so it's an enabler to understanding not only the customer who's buying, but also their end intent. What is it that they're looking for, and really understanding the customer in much more detail.
Absolutely, understanding the journey of each consumer much more in detail with a nuanced understanding of that, and then directing our marketing plans towards it makes more sense. But there's, of course, as I said, there's a lot of it lacks clarity, and as you rightly mentioned, that you need to attach some kind of boxes or compartments, and you need to really back to the consumers and understand them. If you can't track something, then you really can't measure it.
Yeah,
so that's where we are.
There's a couple more kind of things where what you're saying leads me to, right? And I think also there has to be a mapping of what a business is trying to do to a kind of a technological setup in which they are trying to do it. Because we ultimately, if you look from high enough, all businesses are the same. We sell to someone, yes, but at the same time, if you're gonna go into the detail, everyone is completely different. If I just look at across our portfolio of customers, we've got everyone from financial services where they are interested in entering you into the portfolio when you're 18 years old and you open that first proper adult bank account. Yeah. All the way to when you get that first mortgage when you're 35, and all the way until your retirement and savings products, right? So it's a full life cycle. Absolutely. We've got customers who are utility companies where the definition of a customer is really complicated because there is effectively an address and meter, which becomes the entity, which might have a few different contacts associated with it. And as a person, you might be associated with a few different places because you own a few different properties. So this becomes really, really complicated. And there's no really one size fits all, right? With lifetime and kind of a life cycle of a sales cycle is really important as well. Like my favorite recent conversation, we're in a prospect with a luxury car brand in Europe, and they're basically, we kind of try to discuss with them what does the sales cycle looks like, and they say, well, an average consumer who buys us, with our kind of ideal archetype, is a 45 male. And I was like, okay, so what does that shopping starts looking like? Well, he said, well, when they are 10 years old, they usually get this little toy car from their father or grandpa. So they are in the sales cycle with us for like a 25 or 35 years. I'm like, oh, wow, that's really hard to track, right? But like, that's really how these kind of longevity brands are thinking about building their customer base. I think you guys are quite similar in that case, Samsonite specifically, right?
Yeah.
Very good. And so I guess then, what do you find that's kind of some of the common misconceptions around identity management when you're first maybe speaking to customers and their perception of it?
So I think there's only one really, but it's kind of the most important. It's not understanding the benefits of doing this, which are somehow harder to articulate or do require certain maturity, or having seen some issues and problems before you are kind of able to fully grasp this, right? So you are not doing this because it's a good thing to do. Like I don't want companies to be building 360 of customer because those profiles look pretty and we can combine transactional and behavioral and customer support and enrichment from first, second, and third parties. Like that's if it doesn't serve any purpose, why are we doing this? And then it's a technical exercise, and I'll try to be doing better things with my time. But I want to be helping the business, and what you kind of have to see is, how does this help? There's two realities where this has an effect. One is typically one set of use cases is usual advertising, because as a brand, as a marketer who works with us, you're trying to do one of two things. You're trying to increase customer lifetime value, or you're trying to decrease your cost of acquisition. There's no other objective any marketing and sales leader has, right? Thank you for confirming that. So you have to focus on one of those, or both of those, ideally with the same data set. So when you are looking at targeted ads, the identity graph basically helps you to either include or exclude in your targeting everything that customer represents. And I can give you a great example. So as a B2B SaaS company, we are 50 plus people, and one of the softwares we pay and like is Notion. We kind of treat it as our documentation internally and customer database. I have been recently, and I'm the person who purchased it, right? And they have all my logins on all my devices, at least two different mobile devices and computer at work and laptop at home. I've got so they really have the ability to kind of map me fully, right? What do you think I get targeted with? And the special offer ad, enroll, we give you this much in credits. And I'm like, but guys, I'm your customer and I've never got this offer before. So yeah. I'm slightly upset right now, right? So it's either misuses money or upsetting customers or something, because you are misaligning the targeting. And that would be acceptable to do if you didn't know me, if I was fully anonymous to you. But they have everything, all my data, that they could use this way. So if they organized it better into something like identity graph and kind of the effects it has, they would be able to fully block me from any ads I'll ever see. 99% of it, probably. And same thing with direct marketing, right? So this has an effect. This has a qualitative effect to what marketers are doing, which just translates into money, because we're in business and we have to be translating things into money ultimately. So
yeah. And then when that comes over then onto the business side, so Vinay, did you have challenges and were the misconceptions within the business when you're trying to kind of sell the benefits of improving that identity management for those marketing use cases? How did you kind of deal with that, and what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think we are still in that discovery stage. That's what I would say, that we ourselves are trying to learn a lot of things. Traditionally, if you look at as a brand, Samsonite, we're always heavy on offline. We're an offline centric brand, and then we extend it to online, and we are trying to get our act right and footing right and provide the same kind of consumer experience across all the touch points. So being an offline brand with all the brand stores and boutiques, so there's a lot of our understanding of the consumers is very different. So consumers come and then not just transact, but then there's a lot of relationship which is beyond that, after sales service and communication and the CRM that has a program which is there to basically enhance the lifetime value of the consumer and all that. So once we have certain understanding of the consumer, we think that's exactly how it is online, because the points of sale that we have are so many and offline. So we tend to paint it the same way, and then we realize that online the behavior is very different. So consumers at times become very transactional. They're browsing across so many. There's no limitation on that. So they're not limited products. Then you're being fed with so much of information from all directions. You're browsing in one go maybe 10 different websites and trying to look at different deals. Suddenly you become from a you're not thinking about what is the lifetime value of the consumer and the consumer experience. The consumer has suddenly turned into very transactional. So this is something that we keep seeing across, and that's a challenge for us. And how do we keep it? And we have also in the process we've also done the mistake of throwing money at the problem. We think that you throw money at the problem and then it'll go and stick somewhere. So that's what, as a team, some of our teams have also done the mistake. Personally, I was also part of the team, so of course I've also done the mistake thinking that let's spend more and then we would get the consumers. Then we realize that uh, in the process of creating that consumer experience that you've been providing offline, then sometimes we must have become very intrusive, not targeting enough, and then sometimes taking the help of the teams at the end. You when you're searching for results, the teams look for easy way route, which is a discount. They think that okay, like I can run some discounts and that would
That works long term, right?
Yeah.
won't work long term. That then you start believing that those are your consumers, but it's all the time. That's what I keep telling teams and the markets, that consumer is not ours, because the the basic fundamental on which we acquire the consumer is never ours. So
Yeah, and it's being able to keep that consumer engaged over the long term, right? So not just that person that's looking for maybe the discount, but who's going to be the customers that you can build that longer term engagement with as well, and have them as a repeat customer.
yeah, absolutely. I think these are the typical errors of the judgment mistakes that most brands do. I think we are also part of that, is still trying to figure out how we can connect it, make it, close the circle, close the loop, and understand uh, and monetize the data that we have across the platforms.
Yeah, and it's actually a good point again, Pavel, that you were just making on saying about your multi-device, right? You're logged in to a couple of phones, laptop, maybe a couple of tablets, something like this. And then Vinay, as you're saying, you've got customers coming into stores, and you've got an end-to-end customer journey to manage here. But where then do you think that kind of you lose track of the customer journey? And how does that then ultimately lead to impacts in that customer data and profile? Vinay.
Uh, I think one is how in different markets, then we have partners. Like if you look at Middle East region, then every market we have different partners. So they have different ERP systems at their end. The data is getting captured in different forms, and in all the cases, it is never a single window of visibility. We never understand because it's all coming in different forms and different timelines, and it is never a real-time understanding of the consumer. Though we want to have it, but then the system is as such that the data is never in one form, and by the time you try and understand uh, what's the behavior online, third-party platforms, and here, of course, the third-party platforms, the consumers shopping on Amazon or Noon somewhere else. One is you don't understand, you don't have the data,
Yeah.
so you don't have any understanding of it. But your own website, of course, there's a lot of data that's coming there. You try and make some kind of correlations and connect the dots and all that, but it's not real-time understanding of the consumer. So the biggest challenge is how the data is being captured and how it is being thrown at you. We still break our heads in terms of making sense of that data which is coming in different markets and different forms and different sizes.
And especially as well for consumers coming into the store, any data that you may collect there on preferences, habits, anything else, that's going to be added at a later stage as well, right? So again, ability to understand the customer coming in store can often be a challenge for certain brands as well.
Yeah, I think over a period of time we managed to somehow capture the data in terms of. I understand sometimes the data can get very basic in terms of the basic demography of the consumer and their board. But then if you start probing a little more without being intrusive, and you would get better insights to the consumer, and then the voice of the consumer is very important. I think if you're able to capture that well, and then uh, get back to those consumers who purchased, or get back to those consumers who have not purchased, and understand really what went wrong, and
Yeah. Look, something is always better than nothing, and I kind of like to start with that, right? But you kind of need to be practical and stuff. I can give you guys a small example. So we work with a client of ours who's a collection of different travel brands. They sell traditional package tours in different markets, and they are specialized in certain ways, right? And one of the things always has been a brand loyalty, because there's a relatively big one. If you had a good experience with a travel agency, you're going to book with them maybe not every year, but every other year. So there's kind of cyclic behavior. And what, again, targeting and application of this data, not just collecting it for the fun of having good profiles, but for practical reasons, is if I am a consumer of a brand B, then I should not be in the targeting field of a brand A, because that's a wasted budget. I'll just fragment, I'll never purchase with them, and it's never going to really be well spent money. And I think specifically really in here, what's really interesting is a zero party data, right? So we've done kind of cool little activations for different clients. So in travel here, for example, they've got two big pillars: winter holidays, specifically snow and skiing, and they've got summer. And there's a different type of summer packages, of course. But one of the questions when we ask them, what would you like to know about your consumer? It's like, we would really want to know their preference. It's like, yeah, all right, let's ask them. Let's have a little web asset which comes in place where they are not just, hitting the buy button, which is somewhere inintrusive, once a lifetime, once a session, and ask them, do you prefer a beach or a city or a snow or sand? And they click on a picture and you save it and you can store it forever. So suddenly you have a zero party self-declare profile data, preferential, and you can use it. You'll make sure that this customer never goes into a bucket where we send them snow because they only go to beach. Like, it's really simple, and efficiency is there, right?
And I think that's a really good point. Actually, it's understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. So, like I say, you might not have the data right there now, but yeah, hey, let's ask. Let's do something that's unintrusive, that's going to be usable, that we can use to further and not only understand our customer, but even kind of drive product enhancements, or in that case, holiday preferences. So yeah, I think it's really interesting on, just taking a step back and having a think about it. You can understand, okay, what data do we actually need to be able to get to where we want to be.
And I think also there's one really funny misconception to me and really big missed opportunity, which is websites. Like, websites are kind of often perceived as the consumer comes, they click around, they buy or don't buy, and we observe them. But no, it's an interactive thing, and we really can trigger, we can talk, and we can personalize certain actions, and we can collect data, right? And I think what you said is really a big thing. We have customers who traditionally, I'm not a user experience expert, never claimed to be, but I think one of the really key things is a gradual profile building. Don't ask them to fill out a form which is this long. No one has the time to do it. Ask them for one thing, for a phone number, so we can send them personalized, selected news to WhatsApp, even for a limited period of time. And when they interact with that, ask them one more question and add it to the profile, which is either visible to them or invisible. And keep building like that, because they keep having interactions with you over time, right? Rather than deter them with a
Yeah,
like application.
you don't understand everything about everyone, for that the instant they interact with you. Yeah, and Vinay is actually something we were saying earlier, and building up that profile over time, and then also then understanding the changes and the differences in that profile over time, because as we said, you're not the same shopper that you were maybe 10 years ago. So I think that's very important to stay on top of as
Absolutely.
well.
I mean, if I have to draw some kind of an analogy of say automobiles, I mean, look at what happened in the past. Everyone thought that it's all about owning a brand that you can really take it around, that people associate you with that. That becomes your part of your personality. The car that you drive and the place where you live, it becomes part of your personality. But then if you look at the consumer, today consumers have turned out to be more transactional. They are fine with buying a Chinese car. Of course, the quality of these new Chinese cars are in line with many of the established brands, but then they're fine with it because they know that it comes at one third of the cost, and it's got the features that many of these big time brands are going to offer in their high end models. Product is out there, so people are fine with it. So they're not looking at driving it for 8 years or 10 years, and they don't think that today the consumer wants to be seen as a smart consumer. One big change that we have seen from what it was earlier to now, uh, despite the consumer being that aspirational, but still today every consumer wants to be seen as a savvy consumer. That I have made a smart choice. So I'm not spending enough. I'm not spending a lot of money just because of the tag, but I'm a smart consumer.
Would you say that has an implication on loyalty disappearing?
We are seeing that
Mm.
across, not just in our industry, but across. We are noticing that because the way, if you see fast fashion, I mean, so many. If you see the number of stores that are coming out in the fast fashion business, or if you see, say for example, I take an example of say brands for less, which is a discounted format of all these labels and brands. Maybe if you have looked at 5 6 years back, maybe they had 10 15 stores, so they have like 80 90 stores. The consumers have become, as I said, consumers want the best value for their money, what they're spending, so that in their circles around, they need to be seen as or shown. That's a signaling. Every consumer at the end, that you do something, you're kind of doing a silent signaling of what you are.
So I guess to kind of summarize that as well, it's not just about the individual shopping behavior and how that shifts over time, but also trends and shopping trends of the general population and how they may change over time as well.
Yeah, and one thing that we're seeing across consumer brands is, which is a very different trend. Frankly, we did not, we do not foresee this kind of a trend. The consumers today, they're very uh, at two different ends. It's very skewed. You have consumers who are willing to really spend on that particular experience, and they're very particular about they want it, then they want it. They're willing to spend any kind of money for that particular experience. Then you have consumers who just find very transactional, who do not believe in loyalty, who are saying, whichever brand, whichever product it is, they offer me the best value. I'm going to go with it. I'm not going to look at how it's going to be a few years later, and I don't care what people think about it. So.
Yeah, very good. And Pavel, one of the things you were talking about just then with the, being able to get the snapshots and the images, and moving on to kind of anonymous data, and how we're able to use that. Do you think that kind of anonymous data component is sometimes seen as like lower value data within organizations?
Not even. I think it's just literally invisible for in a majority of cases. And I think especially for businesses that have a website as a business funnel, like they really when you talk to head of CVM, customer value management program, CRM, that's really the optics. It's we have the customer captured at the point of transactions, and then we can do the upsell, cross-sell, churn prevention, and all the way ultimately until they leave us, or however that ends, right? And that's really, really common. And no one really looks at what happens before. But if I like kind of look at things through the sense of like a marketing funnel. You've got the awareness, education, whichever rubric you are using, all the way to consideration, and then some sort of conversion and transaction. And somewhere along that kind of before that transaction, in some cases, the consumer authenticates, so becomes from anonymous that visitor who might be returning for a few times. They give you the WhatsApp number, they give you the email address, and kind of allow you to kind of capture that information and structure it and use it later. But I think majority of the CVM programs I'm seeing are really focused at that kind of bottom single percent. And if you look at websites, it's really broad funnel. Like I think e-commerce businesses that are doing 3-4% conversion rate, so 4 people out of 100 would convert, you're lucky. That's a great number, right? I think it's a lot less than that, depends on the type of a business. But I think what's really misunderstood, because these numbers above the 96%, it's been historically measured as a data point in Google Analytics. You look at it, it's like I've got this many people on the website, and that's it. That you never see them coming back. You never consider them as an individual. But the reality is that we can capture them in exactly the same way as we are capturing the consumer. We just don't have the email address next to it, but it's a persistent profile. We'll know your first visit, your second visit, and your third visit. And we'll know that you kept repeatedly looking at this category and that product. And so what I can do is I can push that information back to homepage next time you come, because if we are selling you 7 different insurance products and you looked at specifically that one, well then, if you come back, I want that to be in the homepage banner, because I want to give you a shortcut back to what you were looking at, right? Naturally.
Yeah.
But I think this is really, really misunderstood. And it's probably if there is a single marketing department's opportunity, I think it's the personalization to anonymous.
Yeah, perfect. And like I say, because I guess you're looking at that impulse buy versus the I've done my research, I'm going to go away and think about it and then come back, but I might not have authenticated myself there. And there's still lots of opportunity to be able to engage with the customer and promote services and products to them. And so, Vinay, how does it look from your side?
Yeah, I think most brands, once you are in that mode of conversion, you're looking at. As I said, it's a catch-22 situation. Often teams keep saying that consumers have become very transactional. So the kind of decisions that we need to take have to be much more targeted and all that. So in such a scenario, we look at retargeting those consumers, and then teams feel that a discount or some kind of an incentive is the fastest way to really convert the consumer. And what is the best way to market your brand is when the consumer carries it with them. And that's the best marketing that can happen. If I see more consumers at the airports carrying my products, whether it is any of our brands like American Tourister or Samsonite or whatever. So that's the best way of marketing a brand. So.
And do you get feedback on that in terms of the research that drives that brand visibility from offline, from seeing your products in the airport, and how that influences other potential customers to come into the stores or visit online?
Yeah, absolutely. You see that, especially certain innovative products that we launch and limited editions and collaborations that we do. We often see that because that's much more visible. Whenever we launch any limited editions and consumers look at it, and then we realize that there are many more inquiries on our website and online, on our pages too, on our Instagram pages, and consumers are asking for those products. But then those are limited edition products, so we don't have. So we are still able to understand what's the demand generation. So there is, as I said, there's a lot of information. As I said, information is out there, but the real profiling, the real compartmentalization of that, and that's missing.
Yeah, and it's also about how, if you understand your gaps, how you can bring that in, how you can fill those gaps, and how you can, like I say, over time build a more complete picture.
Absolutely, and sometimes where we make even fundamental errors in terms of those consumers who are asking for those limited edition products, and we said they're out of stock and we don't have it. But then nothing stops us in terms of reaching out to the consumer when the next collaboration happens. Maybe you are reaching out to those consumers and saying maybe you'll be interested in this collaboration, which is going to come up in the next couple of weeks, and we would like you to visit our stores and have a preview of that. So you would be the first consumer before we open it up for everyone please do visit a day before and then have a look at our collaborations and buy, because this again, the data is sitting in silos. It's not getting captured. It's not being tracked properly. Then you cannot measure it. Then you cannot monetize it. I think that's the biggest challenge that we have. Still trying to train our teams and learn ourselves also in the process, and make sure that we don't miss out on these opportunities.
Which it really nicely brings me on to, what are some of the risks around, trying to unify those customer profiles and getting identity management wrong within the businesses, and talking about some of the risks and issues that you might come along or come up against along the way.
The biggest risk is, as I said, we'll make the fundamental mistake of throwing money at it, throwing money at the problem, then going chasing some of the services or some experts, spending money on that and trying to figure out something which is very basic to get your act right, house in order, and getting the different points of contact, the consumer harmonized. So that's the which many of the times we've done that. We're constantly, your cost of acquisition goes up, and then we feel that now it's becoming slightly unviable because we're spending much more money on that. So there are many risks, not just that, but sometimes if you're not targeting it well, it becomes intrusive for the consumer. Then the brand experience that you want to create gets missed, and whenever we have these limited editions of new products that are coming in the market, and the real consumer of a brand is not exposed to those products. Not everybody goes to offline and visits all the time. But if the consumer is not exposed to those products, the real consumer, the loyal consumer, may also feel that how did this brand miss reaching out to me when there's such a beautiful product which is up there.
So, almost the balance then between not being overly intrusive, but also enough engagement that the customer still feels like you are a brand they want to engage with and make more purchases from.
Absolutely. We don't want to end up being in a scenario where as a brand we become more transactional. That's the biggest risk for any brand to get into. I think our endeavor is always to avoid that and ensure that we don't become a transactional brand. So constantly create that kind of an experience and make sure that the consumers, even post purchase, there's a communication window, there's engagement, and then the consumer may have a lot of queries after sales service, and we're always open to that and engage. That's the experience, because we feel the consumer always values when the experience of post purchase is better than the transaction process.
Very good. And then Pavel, I guess from your point of view, probably a bit more of a technical side on where some of the risks and pitfalls might be.
Okay, not really technical, because I ultimately think this is not a technical problem. This is an organizational alignment problem, and execution is easy. I think the problem here is, like, if you kind of face the facts, right? So look, brand loyalty is dead. Customers want value and they go for it. Like, that's objectively measured and I think known in a marketing. The customer experience isn't getting less complex. You have new touch points. Now there's a whole talk of AI agents talking to each other on behalf of customers. I keep reading about your website is going to be dead in 2 years because no one's going to go there. It's all going to be agent to agent. That's obviously a hyperbole, and I don't think that's really going to be that swift. But that is something to consider. There are new touch points. There is new complexity on where the customer wants to interact with you, right? So I think the real risk is not pursuing this and not doing it, because if you want, well, your competitors will, and they will surpass you because they will have a brand experience, therefore better experience towards the consumer, and they will switch. And markets with bigger modes, brands with more protection, sure. If you have 3 telcos in a market where the customer keeps going in a circle in 20 years, then there's not much to kind of lose for them, and they don't really have that pressure. But there's a lot of markets that are competitive, and so the risk is not doing it, rather than how to do it wrong.
Yes, right. Yeah, the risk of inaction. Yeah, which
I think for most brands the biggest nightmare is as a brand you becoming irrelevant for the consumer. So you've set a particular target consumer, and then the moment you become irrelevant, as I said, because the consumers are, the behaviors are changing. Uh, because every 10 to 15 years, you see a different a segment of consumers are coming into the fold. So if you're not able to, uh, if you're not relevant enough and providing the same kind of experience, not the same level of aspiration, then that's a bigger risk.
And it's a good point because it's relevance in terms of the product that you have to offer, but also the relevance of your interactions with the customer as well. So you have to maintain that and evolve that all the way through, and leveraging your data to understand actually as well what the customer and the consumer wants to keep everything relevant from the product to the communications and engagement.
Yeah, absolutely. I think be it product, be it the pricing too. I mean, you're talking about a consumer who's new into the workforce and not willing to pay that kind of a premium on your product. So you need to keep that also in mind, what kind of price that the consumer is willing to pay, and what are the channels where they transact, because you don't expect those consumers to come to your traditional stores experience. And how do I provide the same kind of experience on the platforms where this consumer visits? So that's also a big risk and a challenge that we are working.
Okay, yeah. So it's just about the like I say, maintaining that consumer experience, keeping the consumer experience relevant, and again, as we said, everything evolves. So you need to evolve uh, your data, understanding, engagement, product, everything moves along with the customer.
I mean, for many of the global offline brands, the brand is not the same. The perception is the brand perception is not the same what you had say 5 or 10 years back, because brands are evolving at a much faster pace. And if you look at our overall retail store experience, the experience what we were providing say 5 years or 8 years back is totally different today. Today, you walk into one of our stores and you realize that it's ahead of the time. It provides fantastic experience and all that. But many of these consumers who are transacting online, we want those consumers. Firstly, you will never be able to provide the same level of experience of a retail store on other platforms. But then, how can we provide a piece of that and then draw them into our retail stores offline and get that full experience of the brand? And because that's what will stick, and then that's what will change the perception of the brand over a period of time.
And I think, look, yeah, yes, and there is also lots of like little consideration that kind of turn into like strategic, crossroads. Is where do you sell? Like, there's the obvious lure of marketplaces that's been kind of really big thing. You sell on Amazon, and again, consumer is changing, right? Like you need to go where the consumer is. I did almost something unimaginable on my last trip to Dubai. I almost have bought an Apple phone on Kareem, which I didn't know was an option, just because I couldn't have made it to the
Yeah.
to the store, right? Like this is not something I would have think as a consumer I would ever do. So yes, we change, and I think, but from a brand perspective, I think there's been a lot of kind of deliberation whether do you, if you are not traditionally D2C brand, if you build that because you have that funnel, you own this data. I think we've seen this specifically with PLG companies, like so, products that are supermarket products that they can take you to websites, take you to apps, engage you in sort of some sort of loyalty gamified systems, and they are trying to do that. Even though I will never go to Coca-Cola.com and buy a 6 pack of Coke, right? But I think there's a lot of investments going in that direction as well in last decade, and I think for a good reason, because if you kind of look at the data that you will get from Amazon, it's basically none. Just get the list of orders plus a lot of restrictions around how you can or cannot reactivate a consumer. I think you need to think twice about where do you want that consumer to transact and how much are you willing to invest into that, right?
And I think that's actually a really good point. Kind of links into the next question is, if we're looking at, the technology part and implementing a CDP as being part of the solution, what else do you have to get in place to kind of really start to build that view of the customer?
Look, strategy and goals. The great thing about data is that you can model and you can measure before you've done anything for the most part. So with the use cases that we see customers implementing, whether that's a direct customer engagement or advertising, when we get a hands on the data or when our partners do, they can take a look at it and they can predict what the uplift or how it's gonna work. So that's a lot of you don't have to kind of wait for a 2-year implementation of technology cycle to see some results. You can predict a lot of things up front. I think also one of the things that I really think we kind of as an industry we need to move on from a little bit is from really static table oriented RFPs that are driven by procurement. I think brands need to be piloting things more and trying hands-on comparing solutions because let's be frank, I've seen a bunch of sales process. PowerPoint can handle a lot and slides can lie blatantly, and everyone is everything at this point. Everyone's platformized and everyone can do everything, but very rarely when two people or two companies do the same thing, it ends up being the same thing. And I kind of think there's a risk of getting lost in implementation. So I would really recommend best projects I've seen where pilots turned into production with measurable goals and deliverables. I've seen also a lot of things fail because they just were paperwork process handled by procurement, not the people who would own it, and then falling apart because they realize that there's no dysfunction at the end, or the function at the end. It doesn't map the kind of identity of how we think of our customer, and I think there's a lot of danger in that.
No, absolutely, I totally agree with that. I think the ownership also makes a big difference because even as a pilot case, you want to start it and then see how it works. Then you need someone taking ownership of that and then making sure that it works, and then you extend it to on a larger scale. So.
But I'm not so self-inflating. I don't really think every organization should have a CDP or should have a CDP at this point in time, because I think it's a maturity question, and you really need to know where you are and also where you're going and have a goals and strategy aligned really well. It's a fundamental piece of technology, especially for future AI application, because AI needs context, and guess what? Customer identity and rich 360 profiles, that's a lot of context that you can utilize. But I think there's a time and space for it, and there's not only one way to do it.
And it's also about having the right tool for the right job, which we hear so many and come across so many customers and organizations that are throwing technologies at problems they maybe don't fully understand or haven't thought out, and it's almost like a one size fits all with certain solutions, where it's actually, how does this help us get to where we want to be? What is the value it's going to add? What are the business processes and the other changes that we need to have around this, and then how do we bring all of that together to deliver kind of change within businesses and organizations? And so, Vinay, have you come across this within your role when you're maybe looking at systems and technologies, and how would you go about kind of getting the most value?
I think one of the challenges that we keep facing, I think the fundamental point is to have the clarity of your strategy, what you want to do it. Otherwise, and other aspect to it is, are you able to articulate your problem or the fundamental challenge of the problem? Many of the times it's searching for solutions without having a clarity of what we are searching for. You want to change certain things, you want to improve something, but what is that something that really adds value to your business? I think many a times business leaders are not very clear.
Yeah.
So it is like sometimes I've seen even marketers who call the agency and say, I want to turn my brand into a cool brand. I want my brand to be a go-to brand for Gen Zs. That can't be a brief, or that can't be a strategy. So that lack of clarity, or maybe even if there's a clarity, the lack of articulation and getting to know your consumers and getting to so many of the times the brands, I think, they're constantly there in the drive of chasing consumers and trying to acquire and retain, and then in that cycle it becomes very difficult. So sometimes I think marketers and leaders need to step back and really understand what the consumer wants, and what kind of what's your strategy to reach the consumers. What are the trade-offs? What are you willing to let go? Otherwise, most brands think that everybody's my consumer. I want to be there for everyone. if you're not clear about your trade-offs and then understand who's going to own that piece of the execution of it.
And why do you think that is? Is it do you think sometimes it's too easy to have a narrow focus on the immediate problem that you have in front of you, or is there something else there that's gets in the way?
I think most of the times you're chasing something and you're looking for immediate results. Uh, as I said, if you're not taking a step back and understanding, reimagining your process, how are we running a business today and how we want it to be 3 years from now, and how my business will appear, say, 5 years or 10 years from now.
Yeah.
If you're not able to visualize that today.
Yeah, and it's actually something that I've always thought quite works quite well, and I've used through my career is actually where would you want to be, or what would you do if you had free reign to do
Yeah.
whatever in terms of business process, technology, that kind of dream state. And then, from there you can almost work backwards on, let's bring this back into the art of the possible. And you will find, somewhere that's gets you to where you want to be, that's also within the realms of possibility today. So
One other thing that I want to add, normally when we have these discussions on what we want to do, and all the marketers will come back and say, "Oh, we don't have enough money," so it is fine. Then you ask them, okay, just imagine that there's tons of money. There's no constraint on that. Tell me what different are you going to do? But then you'll realize that the money will flow into the same pit where it's going today. So you realize that it's not the function of the money that's going into it. It's all about how are you able to reimagine your process. What is the best way to reach the consumer? What is the best way to provide the same level of experience and make sure that consumer comes back.
and ultimately get that return on investment that you're making, whether it's in the technologies or the marketing or any of the other steps along the customer journey as well, right? That we want to be able to bring.
At the end, I think it's a lack of clarity. Then we tend to blame everything around us. Say that it's lack of investment or a lack of visibility and everything else. But I think it's more to do with the process. If you're able to get the clarity of your strategy and your process, that's what will simplify it.
Yeah. Okay. And so one of the things we need to talk about as well is that we're living in a region where, data and expectations within the general public are increasing. Obviously, in Europe and the US, we've got very developed, privacy legislation as well. And so, as these rules, regulations, and even public perception are changing and evolving, how does that change the way organizations should think about, their identity management and building that trust? Pavel, maybe you want to kick us off with that.
Sure. So I think there are two angles to this. I think there is what brands need to do legally. What does that look like? What is the kind of the legal bare minimum they have to do? And the bigger thing is, what type of responsibility do they have in the relationship with their consumer, right? Because it's a really big commitment. Because if I'm trusting you with my data, I am assuming you will be treating it responsibly and you're not going to resell it, which has been the early 2000s of this digital space, right? So this has been kind of, these are two different aisles. Like, I'm assuming everyone is intending to behave legally, simply because there's big repercussions and you don't want that to be either end up in penalties or PR damage to your brand. But I think from that other side, I think it's really kind of a customer consumer trust, I think, can be an incredible brand asset if done right. And it has less to do with IT systems and more with a brand strategy and kind of brand execution. And I think that's something we should see more, because that there's some differentiation potential in this. I also think that the kind of the legality of it and being ready for future proof, to kind of being still able to do a lot of things, but having governance and transparency frameworks and understand your data, making sure it doesn't leave the building or your own data center or a country is absolutely fundamental to a lot of operations within the GCC countries specifically. And that's going to be only getting more stringent over time, especially with the shift in geopolitical situation. What we have seen in Europe, for example, is a lot of brands are now questioning the US owned cloud providers, and we have specific demands of customers who want to be in European only ownership company where the American government doesn't have any backdoor. And so in UAE, for example, we're discussing a partnership launch with a do local national UAE only cloud, which kind of is going to enable us to implement into these government and also public organizations with a lot more clarity around what could happen to your data come government knocking, which in this case is just not possible because it's entirely local entity. And I think there needs to be some clarity around the strategy as well. But it's a really more setting a long-term vision and principles that companies are going to be kind of playing within going forward.
Yeah, and then from a consumer focused point of view and giving them confidence in your brand, that's becoming, more and more, the population is more and more knowledgeable on what companies might be doing with their data. And so I guess, Vinay, from your point of view then, in terms of how you're then using that for marketing and engagement, what's that look like from your side?
Yeah, that's a big challenge to make sure that the data is secure. And also in our case, when you're operating with multiple partners and the data is sitting in different countries too. And again, for us to, one is getting access to the data, and the second thing is how you're able to keep that secure within your operations and scheme of things. Not just for us, but also from our partners' point of view. Partners who are dealing with our brand and collecting all the data, how secure are their systems? Because it doesn't matter from a consumer point of view that even if some data gets leaked or some data that can happen in any of the markets, even a small market, it- then as a brand we would be exposed to it and we would be responsible for it. So uh, I think our team constantly tries to create that awareness and making sure that not just us, but our partner systems are robust enough to protect the consumers, because of course the laws they're evolving over time and becoming much more stringent. So we need to be hands-on on these aspects. Uh, Gone are the days where we can say that fine, data is there and we're only looking at about monetizing it, but then protection is, I think, which is very important.
And are you seeing that in the feedback from customers you're engaging with on, that it's becoming more important as a concern from them in terms of what you're using, how you're storing and how you're engaging with them?
Not at this point. We haven't faced that as a challenge because maybe I think everyone realizes that their entire information is out there. So we may be the last one to really do any harm with that information or the data that's out there. But we haven't really faced the challenge. But of course, consumers, uh, some percent of the consumers are not comfortable sharing some information, and we are fine with it. Even on our website, we realize that uh, many of the times the teams at the back end always insist on collecting that consumer information and running some kind of incentive to register and get the data and all. But we feel that consumers should have the option of buying as a guest. I mean, you don't want to divulge anything and then just buy, make a transaction. That should be still fine. So we really don't want to insist on that. So
Yeah, and ultimately giving the customer the choice and making it the most comfortable experience for the individual.
absolutely, I don't think there should be any strings attached. Consumers should be free enough to whether to give or not. It should be totally fine.
Yeah, and Pavel?
Yeah, I think look, this is absolutely generational. I think the upcoming generations are a lot more sort of digital native, and they do have a bigger understanding, better understanding to what happens to their data when they enter services. Uh, does it get voice? Would we see customers going back to clients and asking for what do you do with my data? No. Absolutely not. Consumers want frictionless experiences. They don't read the terms and conditions. You might, because you work in digital space and you're curious about what are you going to collect in this app when you install it. And I'm going to be more concerned about allowing location tracking for certain services I'm using on my phone, and for some others I will not enable it. But that's because we are the kind of 0.5% of professionals, because we spend our days in this, and we have sort of more of an inclination. But I think general consumers know. But I think they demand a trade-off. I think they are willing to give you data, understanding ideally you use it safely, securely, legally, but also they want a personalized experience back. Right? They kind of want something back, I think.
So it's very much if you give me something of value that I value as a service or a product or a brand I resonate with, I'd be happier to share my data with you.
Better experience. And I think consumers these days are absolutely used to training their own algorithms and products, right? Like, I very diligently click on the like and dislike button on my Netflix shows because I want to tell it what I want more of, because I don't want to see random recommendations. So yes.
No, that's very interesting. Yeah, as well. I still don't really do that with my Netflix. So I'll have to start doing that.
At our end, we need to be absolutely clear and train our teams, because tomorrow, as you rightly said, I was just thinking about it. What the consumer turns up and says, "You're collecting my data, but what are you going to do with it? And how is it going to impact my life?" If I'm going to share with you, and as retail members who are at the forefront, and if they're not able to come up with a compelling answer to it, then it leads to some kind of a mistrust. So I think we need to reimagine all these things, in the new day and age, and make sure that our teams are trained well enough, and we're making proper use of the data that we have, and also communicate that with the consumers.
Adding to that, though, was one thing I would really like to see in businesses, kind of internally, organizationally, and prioritization wise, is I'd like to see more of a clear strategy of building on first-party data foundation. So I don't really hear a lot of CMOs going around and saying, my North Star, other than low cost of acquisition, is to build a growing addressable audience, to understand that I have, million customers and 3 million registered people that I can reactivate. Because I think, which we're referencing earlier, is that there's a lot of kind of incentive-driven acquisition, discounts here, there, depends on markets. I think that's the case. And I think there's also certain depletion and wash of databases, right? So like we've seen this with growing channels. Like it's really easy to onboard people into your WhatsApp community or into email in different markets. But what you are not really watching so much is how many of them unsubscribe and when. And I think that's you can't really keep replacing forever, because ultimately you're going to go through the entire population. So it's not sustainable practice. And again, data helps you measure that. And if you make it a focus of a company, you'll realize that and we measure this with clients, we try to measure this for clients, is we try to show them, here is what, when you can personalize the customer, what does this mean in a customer lifetime value, in transaction sort of basket growth, and when you don't, what does it look like? So I think having clarity about KPIs and kind of trying to target growth of addressable audiences through identity is something I'd like to see more of.
Yeah, and
but I kind of agree with that. Typically, sometimes you acquire consumer and they're part of your database, and then you're not doing enough justice to the consumer and providing the service and the experience. It's like, just you aspire to buy something, you bought that, and then you don't value enough to maintain it, and then you aspire to own something else. But you don't value what you have already, and you don't nurture it, then it's always the same game of, you ask for something new, but then you lose what you have. So
very good. And so actually save some of those ideas, because we're going to kind of move on to the next part, which is Habibi Fix This. So this is the part of the episode where we do 60 seconds, no theory, frameworks, and just a real scenario. What would you do? So describe it in 60 seconds. So Pavel, we'll start with you. So a company is investing heavily in its personalization and customer engagement. They've got data from web, apps, CRM, and bringing it in from some of their offline channels. But they've got fragmented identity, no trust in the data across the organization, and their results aren't improving. So what steps are they going to do? What would you fix, and what should they stop doing?
Whew, okay, 60 seconds. So sounds heavy on marketing. So this is clearly a marketing initiative. There's not really enough of IT and data stakeholders. So I'd first bring those two into a room, clearly define priorities and rules of engagement, who owns what, and make sure that they have infrastructure and tooling that matches their environment. So they're in certain cloud, they're heavily invested in a data warehouse, so there's no one size fits all like we established before. So have some sort of resemblance of a first-party data management layer, whether that's a CDP. Obviously, I would have typically a sort of a field internal person to put that in everywhere because I see how powerful that is. So have a CDP-like technology. Make sure identity resolution is well selected because there's a Martech. The difficult part is that everyone can be everything, and if you have been email tool, then your kind of customer identity is going to be very email centric, and you can't really change it to much else. So make sure this fits your customer kind of description, customer design, and data type, data model, and pick that right and implement it and make sure these things are being centralized but also centrally activated, that your personalization is feeding from the same data feed as your marketing automation, because that's really, really, really important. So you get that consistency where I'm being targeted with one product when I come to the website and then when I open my WhatsApp or open my socials with advertising. So consistency, alignment of IT, technical and marketing users, and definitely some sort of identity resolution capability, typically as part of a CDP stack, however that is composed.
That's a very thorough blueprint there for anyone listening and wanting to improve their own identity management within their organization. So thank you for that, Pavel. And Vinay, so same scenario for you. Do you want me to read it again, or you got it?
I understood. I think Paul made it easy for me. So all I have to say is I just have to reach out to the expert who can solve it. So I think as a marketeer, as a brand owner, we need to take a step back and understand what's the framework. First, we need to design the framework and bring in the experts who can solve that problem. Otherwise, we'll be just going in circles without any results. And one fundamental question that we always ask our teams is also, one is getting the data, one is data set, and secondly, how accurate is the data? Most of the time we realize that there's data, but then when it comes to the accuracy of the data, we can't really pinpoint and say that it's 100% or 80%. Many of the times it may be 50 also. So how do we capture the data and how accurate it is? That's going to define the real results. I think it's a complete understanding, and that's why I said we need to bring in experts and understand the entire framework, and then make sure that as a strategy we are driving towards it. Otherwise, it'll be one more experiment of spending money, but then not driving results and ROI.
Fully agree. Data quality is my second favorite boring topic, but I think one thing really resonates. You said bring in experts. I think a lot of the kind of issues are potentially in the fact that I see organizations trying to build stuff internally where they don't really have the experience. I would definitely encourage brands to work with consultants, bring in a specialist who will help them to kind of navigate this, because it's so easy to get sold the wrong thing. It's easy to kind of get lost in all of the noise that's out there and to kind of build the foundation wrong, and you can kind of be spent way over reverse engineering everything later when you realize what's how this is saying that if you're building a house, the first one is going to be absolute rubbish, the second one is going to be sort of okay, and the third one is going to be quite good and livable, right? But that's if an organization has never done CDP, never done identity resolution or anything like that, you definitely building the first house, so you're going to live in it.
Absolutely. I think one is the advantage, the time frame, you lose that, and also the energy of the team. I think the energy that they put in the first time, making sure that everything was right. And if that doesn't work, it's not the same kind of. I mean, as you mentioned about building the house, the level of energy that you would have initially while building your home will not be the same the third or fourth time. So you need to make sure that you're getting it right for the first time.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think I think through all of this conversation, it has been around having that. It's not just about the technology. It's not just about one department within a business. It's not just about data quality, right? It's how you bring the business, the technology, and everything together under a unified strategy. And so, I think that's been great conversation today. We've talked about that, having that identity resolution foundation, how you get customer data to actually work for you as well. And also some of the kind of the pitfalls and challenges. But I think just before we close out, what would you have as kind of key takeaways and closing statements? So Pavel, we'll start with you.
Look, I think future, we know where we are headed, right? The landscape is complicated as is, with multiple touch points that consumers can shop online, offline experiences. But I think the future is even more complex with kind of AI running at us at a really, really high velocity. So I think in future, a context is going to be a winner. If you want to have a grasp of your consumer context, if you want to have good experience, you need that foundation of a first party and zero party and eventually second party data. So build that. No matter who you are, which business you are, you have to have that.
Very good. Thank you. And Vinay?
I think the fragmentation is something that's challenging for all global brands. So I think that's one thing that will be challenging in the future. I'm sure it will only get complex from here. Consumer behaviors that you talk about will keep changing from different geographies, because it's not uniform to one geography. And even within one geography, there can be so much of fragmentation of it. So one is to connect the dots and make sense of that data and unify it, and then bring some sense of understanding and decision making. I think that will be the key for the organizations that will be successful, or the ones who want to be successful. So.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you both for joining us today. And so that wraps up this episode of Data Habibi. We hope this conversation has resonated with you. And if you're someone who is wrestling with their data, personalization or trust in their data, in our next episode, we'll be continuing to push past buzzwords and into the realities of building data and AI models that actually work. So catch us on Spotify, YouTube, and LinkedIn, and we'll put all of the links in the description of the podcast today. So, gentlemen, thank you very much.